Are you okay? I've been looking for you everywhere.
I just needed some time alone, that's all.
It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that makes even the strongest hearts uneasy. The rain fell in, endless sheets soaking the cracked streets of Detroit. Thunder rolled through the sky and lightning flashed, like a camera capturing every lonely shadow in sight. In the middle of that storm stood a small gas station, its flickering neon sign barely holding on to life. Inside that little garage, a man named Jake worked tirelessly, his hands covered in oil and his shirt drenched in sweat. He had been fixing cars for over a decade, but tonight he looked more tired than ever, his eyes heavy, his heart heavier. Jake was the kind of man who didn't talk much. He had seen too much, lost too much, and the silence of his workshop had become his only companion. The rain outside was his music, the sound of wrenches and engines, his only language. He was just about to lock up for the night when bright headlights cut through the darkness, blinding him for a moment. He squinted through the rain, trying to see who it was. A black luxury SUV skidded to a stop right in front of the garage tires, splashing muddy water all around. For a second, Jake thought it was trouble. People didn't usually stop here this late at night, especially not in cars that expensive. Before he could even move, the door of the SUV opened and a man's voice shouted through the rain, trembling and full of fear. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk. Please, someone help me." Jake froze. The words hit him like a punch. He ran out into the rain, his boots splashing through puddles, and saw a man struggling near the door of the SUV. He was tall, dark-skinned, and wearing an expensive suit, but he was clearly in pain. His wheelchair had fallen out onto the ground, and he was half leaning out of the car trying to pull himself up. Jake rushed forward without thinking. Hey, easy, man, I got you," he said, and carefully lifted the stranger into his wheelchair. The rain soaked them both, but Jake didn't care. He wheeled the man into the garage, under the yellow lights, and for the first time got a clear look at him. The man's face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with pride and fear at the same time. His suit was drenched, but it was obvious he was someone important. "Thank you," he whispered, breathless. "My name is Daniel Carter." Jake recognized the name instantly. Carter Motors, the luxury car company everyone dreamed of working for. "You're the CEO," Jake said, his voice filled with disbelief. Daniel nodded weakly. "Yeah, but right now I'm just a man who can't walk and needs help." Jake quickly pushed Daniel further inside the garage, away from the cold rain. The storm outside was relentless, the wind howling through the cracks in the old metal walls. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he tried to catch his breath. His designer shoes were covered in mud, his jacket soaked through, and his face glistened with raindrops that mixed with sweat. Jake grabbed an old towel from his workbench and handed it to him. "Here, dry off, man. You're freezing." Daniel took it with a weak smile. "Thank you. I didn't mean to scare you back there." Jake shook his head. "No harm done, just didn't expect a car like that showing up this late." As the rain hammered the roof, Jake looked outside at the sleek black SUV parked under the dim streetlight. It was unlike anything he had ever seen up close, a Maybach, perfect from every angle except for the slight dent in the fender and the smoke still curling from under the hood. Jake glanced back at Daniel. "You said you can't walk. What happened to you?" Daniel looked down at his legs, then back up at Jake, his eyes full of a quiet pain. "A car accident 5 years ago, changed everything, lost the use of my legs, but not my mind or my will." Jake nodded silently. He understood pain more than most people would. Daniel studied Jake's small, cluttered garage. There were broken cars everywhere, tools scattered across benches, and old posters peeling off the walls. "You work alone?" Daniel asked. Jake nodded. "Yeah, can't afford to hire anyone anymore. Business has been slow. People go to big shops now where they get charged more but think it's better." Daniel chuckled softly. "Sometimes the small shops have the biggest hearts." Jake half smiled. "Maybe." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the rain filling the empty spaces between their words. Daniel looked around again, his gaze landing on a picture taped to the wall. It showed a smiling woman and a little girl next to Jake, both of them standing beside an old pickup truck. "Your family?" he asked quietly. Jake's face darkened. He nodded softly. "Yeah, my wife and daughter, they're gone drunk. Driver 3 years ago?" Daniel's expression changed. Instantly, sorrow and understanding mixing in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Jake looked at him. Then at the broken car outside, "Seems like cars bring pain to both of us, huh?" Daniel gave a sad laugh maybe, but tonight maybe one can bring hope again. Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Daniel just smiled faintly. "We'll see," he whispered as thunder rolled again outside. The rain outside kept pounding like drums of fate beating. Against the thin metal walls of the garage, the storm didn't seem like it would end anytime soon. Jake poured Daniel a cup of coffee from an old thermos. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. Daniel wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat sink into his cold fingers for a moment. The two men just sat there in silence. The only sounds were the patter of rain, the hum of a flickering light, and the occasional rumble of thunder. Daniel looked up finally, his eyes scanning the tools hanging on the wall, neatly arranged. "Despite the messy surroundings, you've been doing this long." Jake shrugged. "Most of my life cars were my escape when things went wrong. Fixing them made me feel like I could still fix something, even when I couldn't fix everything else." Daniel nodded slowly. "I get that more than you know." Jake leaned against the workbench. Arms crossed. "You must have a big team working for you at Carter. Motors, huh? Fancy office, big paychecks." Daniel gave a tired smile. "Something like that, but you know what money doesn't fix. Loneliness." Jake raised an eyebrow and Daniel continued. "When I lost my legs, I also lost people, friends. Disappeared. My wife left my board, tried to replace me. They thought a man in a wheelchair couldn't lead a company about cars." Jake's chest tightened hearing the pain in Daniel's voice. He looked down at his calloused hands and said quietly, "People only see what's broken, not what still works." Daniel smiled faintly. "You sound like you've been through hell yourself." Jake didn't answer right away. He just looked at the photo of his wife and daughter on the wall again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Drunk driver took them both. I was supposed to fix the brakes that week, but I kept delaying it. Now all I fix are strangers' cars." Daniel stared at him, his expression soft, full of empathy. "You blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault." Jake's jaw clenched. "Maybe not, but it feels that way every day." The air grew heavy again, filled with unspoken pain. Two men from different worlds sitting in a small garage bound by the same kind of loss outside. The storm roared, but inside something was beginning to change. Maybe it was the warmth of the coffee or the quiet understanding between them. For the first time that night, neither man felt completely alone. A sudden flash of lightning lit up the garage, followed by a deafening roar of thunder. Daniel's phone started ringing on the small table beside him, the sound sharp and urgent in the quiet room. He reached for it with shaky hands and answered quickly. "Yes, this is Carter." His voice was firm but tired. The call lasted only a few seconds, and when he hung up, he looked frustrated. Jake glanced at him. "Something wrong?" Daniel sighed heavily. "Yeah, my driver just called. The Maybach won't start. It's completely dead. I can't afford delays. I have an important investor meeting in the morning, and that car is the only one that can get me there on time." Jake pushed away from the workbench and grabbed his toolbox. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Please do." Jake walked out into the storm, his boots splashing in puddles as the rain soaked through his shirt. Again, he popped open the hood of the luxury car and squinted under the flickering streetlight. Smoke curled out from the engine, and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. Jake whistled softly. "Whoever worked on this last messed it up bad." Daniel rolled his wheelchair closer, stopping just at the edge of the garage. "What do you think?" Jake wiped the rain from his forehead and leaned in closer to inspect the wires, the spark plugs, and the battery. "This engine's a masterpiece, but someone's treated it like trash." He muttered softly to himself. Daniel watched him carefully. It was strange to see a man work with such focus and gentleness. Jake wasn't rushing, he wasn't guessing. Every move he made was deliberate, like a musician playing a familiar song. "You really know what you're doing," Daniel said after a while. Jake gave a half smile. "Cars talk to me if you listen close enough. They tell you what's wrong." Daniel tilted his head and smiled. "Back money can buy cars, but it can't buy skill or heart." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, well, tonight you're lucky you've got both," he said, and grabbed his wrench. For the next 2 hours, Jake worked nonstop, his hands steady and his eyes sharp. Sparks flew as he tightened bolts and rewired parts. Daniel watched in silence the storm raging behind them, but inside the garage there was a rhythm to Jake's movements, a kind of calm precision. When he finally turned the key, the engine came to life with a soft purr. Deep and smooth, Daniel stared wide-eyed, impressed and speechless. The broken Maybach was alive again. Jake leaned against the car, breathing heavily. Told you, cars talk, you just gotta listen. The sound of the engine echoed softly through the garage, a deep, calm hum that seemed to cut through the storm. Outside, Daniel stared in disbelief, his mouth slightly open and his hands gripping the armrest of his wheelchair. You did it, he said finally, his voice filled with surprise and a touch of awe. Jake shrugged, wiping the grease from his hands with a rag. Just needed someone to care enough to fix it, he said. Simply, Daniel shook his head. I had top engineers from my company. Look at this. They couldn't figure it out. How did you? Jake smiled faintly. Years of practice and a little bit of listening, he tapped the hood gently. Machines are like people. You rush them, you lose them. Daniel gave a quiet laugh that soon faded into a heavy sigh. His eyes drifted to the dark floor, the hum of the car now blending with the rain outside. Sometimes I wish fixing people was that easy, he murmured. Jake froze. For a second, he wasn't expecting that kind of honesty from a man like Daniel, a CEO, someone who had everything the world could offer. Jake leaned against the wall and spoke softly. You'd be surprised how many broken people end up here, not for their cars, but just to talk. Daniel looked up, curious. You help them? Jake nodded. Sometimes I try to, but I couldn't. Help the ones who mattered most. He pointed toward the photo on the wall, his wife and little girl smiling beside that old pickup truck. His voice cracked when he spoke. If I'd fixed the brakes that week, maybe they'd still be here. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He wheeled closer and said quietly, you're blaming yourself for something you couldn't control. Jake looked away. Maybe, but that doesn't make it easier. Daniel nodded slowly. I know how that feels when the accident happened. I kept asking myself, why me? Why not someone else? The pain doesn't go away. You just learn to build a life around it. The rain softened outside, and for the first time that night, there was peace in the air. Daniel looked at Jake again, this time, not as a mechanic, but as a man who understood him, a man who had fallen but was still standing in his own way. Jake met his gaze and smiled faintly. Guess we both fix broken things, huh? Daniel smiled back. Yeah, but maybe tonight we fixed a little bit more than a car. Daniel sat quietly for a while, his hands resting on the wheels of his chair, his eyes distant as if lost somewhere. Far beyond the rain-soaked streets, Jake could see thoughts spinning behind. That calm expression, thoughts of regret, fear, and maybe a glimmer of hope. The silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy like the quiet, right? Before a big decision, finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low but steady. Jake, what? If I told you I could give you something better than just cars to fix? Jake raised an eyebrow, half amused and half confused. What do you mean? Daniel leaned forward, his tone more serious. I mean, a chance to use what you have the way it deserves to be used. Jake let out a short laugh. Come on, man. I'm just a mechanic from a broken neighborhood. I don't have fancy degrees or shiny shoes. People like me don't end up in places like yours. Daniel smiled slightly. You think I ended up in mine by luck? I started in a garage, smaller than this one, fixing bikes for kids in my neighborhood. Now I run one of the biggest car companies in the country. But you know what? I miss this, the smell of oil, the hum of an engine, the feeling that what you build matters. Jake stared at him for a long moment, unsure if this was some kind of test or joke. Daniel continued, Carter Motors is struggling. The world's changing fast, and most of my engineers, they've forgotten what cars mean. They think only about profit, about data, about image, but not about soul. I need someone who still feels it, someone real, someone like you. Jake laughed, shaking his head. Me working for Carter Motors, that's a good one. Daniel didn't laugh. He looked Jake right in the eyes. I'm serious. I don't care about degrees or suits. I care about passion. Jake leaned back, crossing his arms. You don't even know me. Daniel smiled. I know enough. You worked in this storm just to help a stranger. You fixed a car no one else could, and you did it without asking for a single dollar. That tells me everything I need to know. Jake fell silent. The sound of rain filled the room. Again, he looked down at his calloused hands, then at Daniel's steady, determined gaze. Maybe, he thought, just maybe, fate had driven that broken car into his garage for a reason. A week later, Jake found himself standing in front of a building so tall it seemed to touch the clouds. The glass walls shimmered under the morning sun and sleek. Electric cars lined the driveway. His old truck looked completely out of place. Among them, he almost turned around twice before stepping inside the security guard. Looked at him funny. Oil stains still marked his boots and his jacket smelled faintly of gasoline. But Daniel had insisted he come, so he did. The lobby was huge, polished floors, bright lights, people in suits moving fast. Jake felt like he had walked into another world. Daniel appeared from the elevator wearing a sharp gray suit, his wheelchair gliding smoothly over the floor. His face lit up when he saw Jake. "Glad you made it," he said. Jake nodded nervously. "Yeah, still not sure why I'm here." Daniel smiled. "Because I keep my promises. That's why. Come on. There's something I want to show you." They rolled through a series of glass doors and entered a massive workshop unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Engineers in white coats were gathered around a sleek silver car, futuristic in design, but it sat lifeless. Daniel stopped beside it. "This is our prototype," he explained. "Our future electric model. My best team has been at it for months, but no one can make it run." Jake walked closer, his eyes scanning the car from front to back. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Then he opened the hood. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Daniel watched as Jake examined each part. With calm, steady hands, the engineers exchanged doubtful glances. The man looked nothing like an expert. He didn't even have gloves on. After about an hour, Jake took a deep breath and said, "Try the ignition." Daniel pressed the button, and suddenly the car came to life. The lights flickered, the motor hummed softly, and the quiet whir of energy filled the room. The engineers gasped. One of them whispered, "How he do that?" Daniel grinned. "Told you he listens to cars." Jake stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just needed the wires to breathe a little," he said. With a small smile, Daniel turned to the stunned room. "Gentlemen, meet our new chief engineer, Jake Turner." The room went silent for a second, then applause erupted. Jake froze his mouth. Opening in disbelief, Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "Welcome to Carter Motors, my friend." Months passed, and life began to look different for both men. The storm that had once brought them together felt like a lifetime ago. Jake now walked through the glass halls of Carter Motors with confidence. His hands still bore grease marks, and his clothes never quite fit the corporate look, but people respected him because he made things work. He didn't just fix cars, he fixed ideas, the kind of man who made everyone believe again. Under his leadership, Carter Motors launched its first eco-friendly engine, one that changed the way people looked at cars and the company's future. Daniel watched proudly from his office, his eyes lighting up every time he saw Jake speaking with the younger engineers, teaching them not from textbooks but from heart. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Daniel called Jake to the stage during a company press event. The room was filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and curious investors. Daniel rolled his wheelchair to the microphone, his voice calm but strong. "Success isn't about how high you climb," he said. "It's about how many people you lift with you." The crowd went silent. Daniel looked over at Jake, the man who had once fixed his car in the middle of a storm, and smiled. "This man here," he continued, "a small-town mechanic, gave my company its soul back when I met him. He didn't see a CEO. He saw a broken man who needed help, and he helped me without asking for anything in return." The audience erupted into applause, cameras clicking, lights flashing. Jake looked down shyly, his face red with emotion. He stepped forward to the mic and said softly, "And a man who couldn't walk helped me." Stand again, that single line made the whole room fall silent for a moment. Daniel smiled wide, his eyes shining with pride and tears. The two men shook hands, and the sound of clapping filled the hall, echoing like thunder. From that day forward, Jake and Daniel became more than colleagues. They became brothers, bound not by business, but by shared pain and shared healing. Together, they built a company that valued kindness over competition and passion over profit. Sometimes when the night was quiet and the city lights glowed outside, Daniel would think back to that rainy night when his car broke down and a stranger came running through the storm to help him. He would smile softly, remembering the words that started it all. "Please, don't hurt me, I can't walk." Because that night, neither of them knew they were about to fix far more than a car. They were about to fix each other.